In 1888, an Egyptian farmer hit something solid with his plow outside a small village in the Nile Delta. He dug down. He found a mass grave, not of humans. An archaeological excavation that followed eventually counted, by weight and by careful sampling, somewhere between 300,000 and 80,000 individual remains, all of a single species. All of them cats. Embalmed, wrapped in linen, buried with care 2,000 years earlier by a civilization that worshipped them. We are going to walk through one of the strangest religious traditions in human history. The Egyptian cat cult ran for at least 1,500 years. It produced an estimated 8 million cat mummies. It built temples whose walls still stand. And then, with shocking speed, it disappeared. What happened, why it happened, and what cats meant to a civilization that built the pyramids? The story begins with a goddess named Bastet. In early Egyptian religion, around the 3rd millennium BCE, Bastet was depicted as a lioness, a protector of the pharaoh, a warrior figure, dangerous and powerful. But over the next 1,000 years, her image gradually changed. By the time of the New Kingdom, around 1500 BCE, Bastet was no longer a lioness. She had become a domestic cat. Why the change? The most accepted theory is that around the same period, domestic cats became economically essential in the Nile Delta. Egyptian agriculture depended on grain storage. Vast silos of wheat and barley fed the population and underwrote the entire economy. Where there is grain, there are rats, and where there are rats, there must be cats. The cat became the guardian of the food supply. The goddess softened from lioness to house cat to match. Bastet became one of the most popular deities in Egypt. Festival processions in her honor drew, according to Herodotus, hundreds of thousands of pilgrims annually to her main temple. She was associated with home, fertility, music, dance, and protection. Her sacred animal was the cat. And her favored ritual in the late period was the offering of cat mummies. Here is the part that genuinely surprised modern archaeologists. The Egyptian cat cult eventually became an industry. Pilgrims who visited a temple of Bastet would purchase a cat mummy as an offering. The mummy would then be placed in a temple-administered necropolis as a votive gift to the goddess. The scale was enormous. Estimates published in the journal Antiquity suggest that as many as 8 million cat mummies were produced during the late Ptolemaic and Roman periods. Roughly the last 3 centuries before the Common Era and the first 2 centuries of it. To supply that volume, temples appeared to have operated cat breeding facilities. X-ray analysis of cat mummies in the British Museum and the Natural History Museum in London has shown that the majority of the mummified cats were less than 2 years old when they died. Many show evidence of having been killed deliberately by neck dislocation, a method consistent with industrial scale processing. This is not the cuddly Bastet story. The cult, in its final centuries, ran an enormous and at times disturbing supply chain. Kittens were bred specifically to be killed, mummified, sold to pilgrims, and offered to the goddess. An entire industry, ranging across multiple temple complexes, devoted to producing cat mummies. In 1888, when the mass grave at Beni Hassan was discovered, the volume was so large that British merchants bought hundreds of thousands of cat mummies, shipped them to England, ground them into powder, and sold them as agricultural fertilizer. A single shipment was recorded at 19.5 tons of mummified cats. The center of the cult was a city called Bubastis. In modern Egyptian Tel Basta, about 50 miles northeast of Cairo. It contained the central temple of Bastet, an enormous complex described by Herodotus, who visited it personally in the 5th century BCE. His description is one of the most enthusiastic surviving accounts of any ancient temple. Herodotus wrote that the city of Bubastis was built on raised ground, surrounded by canals on 3 sides, with the great temple of Bastet at the center. He describes the temple as encircled by tall trees, with a sacred lake, and a colonnaded approach lined with carved sphinxes. He claims that during the annual festival of Bastet, 700,000 pilgrims would travel by river from across the country, drinking, singing, and dancing on the journey. He calls it the largest public gathering in the Egyptian calendar. At its peak, somewhere between 500 BCE and 100 CE. The cat cult was one of the most important religious traditions in the Eastern Mediterranean. It survived the Persian conquest, the Greek conquest, and the early Roman conquest. And then, with relative suddenness, it ended. In the 3rd century of the Common Era, the Roman Empire began an increasingly aggressive Christianization of its provinces. In 391 CE, the Emperor Theodosius issued a decree banning pagan worship across the empire. Egyptian temples were closed by force. Statues were defaced or destroyed. Bubastis was abandoned. The mummification industry, which had operated continuously for more than 500 years, collapsed within a single generation. One archaeological detail is particularly striking. At several late-period sites, archaeologists have found unfinished cat mummies. Animals partially wrapped, never completed, abandoned in the workshops where they were being prepared. The industry ended mid-shift. The artisans walked away. No new cat mummies appear in the archaeological record after roughly the year 400 CE. Set aside the industrial darkness of the late cult. In daily Egyptian life, away from the temple supply chain, cats were treated with extraordinary respect. Killing a cat, even accidentally, was a serious offense. The historian Diodorus Siculus recorded an incident in the 1st century BCE in which a Roman soldier in Egypt accidentally killed a cat. An angry crowd gathered. The pharaoh's officials could not protect him. The soldier was killed by the mob. When a household cat died of natural causes, the entire family shaved their eyebrows as a sign of mourning. The body was then carried, sometimes for many miles, to the nearest temple of Bastet, where it was mummified and interred. Some surviving cat sarcophagi were elaborately carved, painted, and inscribed with the personal name of the animal. We know the names of some of these cats. One of the most famous, owned by Crown Prince Thutmose around 1400 BCE, was named Tamu. Her sarcophagus is in the Cairo Museum today. So, what does it mean? For roughly 1,500 years, the most powerful civilization in the Mediterranean treated cats as semi-divine. They built temples for them, they mourned them, they mummified them by the millions. They also, in the final centuries, industrialized that worship in a way that modern readers find disturbing. All of this for an animal that, biologically, was almost exactly the same as the cat, sleeping on your couch right now. The Egyptian cat cult ended 1,700 years ago. But the species it elevated is still here. Your house cat, if you have one, descends from those same Nile Delta cats that once filled the temples of Bastet. Genetic studies of mitochondrial DNA in modern domestic cats trace at least one major maternal lineage back to ancient Egyptian populations. The cat sitting on your kitchen counter, looking at you with absolute composure, is a direct descendant of an animal that an entire civilization worshipped as the daughter of a goddess. The cat, of course, already knew this. If you want more strange history and cat science, hit subscribe. See you on the next one.